Rav Moshe Feinstein buried here in Har HaMenuchos. When you say Rav Moshe, you know it's Rav Moshe Feinstein. You just need to write Rav Moshe, and everyone understands. Rav Moshe was born in Belarus as a precocious child, but it wasn't just his brains, it was his personality. He was an Adam Mikal Adam, a new Bachar in MTJ, his yeshiva on the Lower East Side. Didn't know what Rav Moshe looked like. Back in the days, not everyone had like the gadol pictures that we have today. Rav Moshe approached him to say, Shalom Aleichem, welcome to the yeshiva. And the Bachar didn't chop the cue, and he thought that it was someone holding out their hand to collect, so he gave Rav Moshe a quarter. Rav Moshe put the quarter in his pocket and said shkoyach, went back to his seat. It was only later that day that the Bachar chop that he just gave tzedakah to the Rosh Yeshiva. Rav Moshe was the Rav in Luban, and as the communists destroyed the city and the Yiddishkeit from within, Rav Moshe was the last one to leave the city. He refused to leave until all the Yidden were gone, and he said the ship needs a captain. His wife didn't go to the mikvah for a very long time. They had a hidden mikvah, but he said that if the rabbi, the head rabbi, the communists knew who was the chief rabbi, if he's using this, then there must be something kosher about it, and they were trying to pitch the mikvah as something not kosher. So there's a big age gap between Reb David and Reb Chaim Tov and Reb Reuven Feinstein because of that. Rav Moshe was turned down when he wanted to print his original Shilas Shuas Zigros Moshe. He writes in the introduction that you shouldn't paskin based off of it, even though you go into any halachic kollel and that's like 90% of the conversation. He had to print it himself, so he did, and the Maisa ended up financially being a great move. So that worked out well. There was someone else who went to that same printer later and wanted to print a sefer against Rav Moshe, a seething rebuttal to Rav Moshe's psakim. And he was known to be someone who was talking out against Rav Moshe unkindly. And the printer called Rav Moshe to give him a heads up. He's like, this guy is here and he wants to print a sefer that's like seethingly against you. And Rav Moshe said, no, everyone needs a parnasa, why not? He said, the sefer is going to come out of my printing press. It's going to look like a Nigros Moshe. And he said, Psitter. He had no problem with it. Rav Moshe himself, there's a famous story that the inkwell was spilled by one of his Talmidim on his brand new Gemara. In those days, a brand new Gemara was not something you just came by. And when Moshe came back in, he looks at his Gemara and says, oh, it looks good in blue. And just continued. And everyone was like, sure, he would explode. Later on, Rav Moshe says, and this part's a little less famous, he says, naturally, I'm not a very calm person. I worked on myself to become the calm enough to be able to be in a situation like that and not explode. Someone once closed the door on his hand, and he told the driver to drive. And it's a big, heavy car door also in those days. It was like steel. And when they got around the corner, or maybe even when they got home, Rav Moshe finally asked for some medical help with his hand. He didn't want the guy who shut the door on Rav Moshe's hand to chop what he had just done. My grandfather was a Bachar in MTJ, and he was driving Rav Moshe, and he just randomly said a number. And he said, what was that about? So later he said, oh, no, never mind. And happened to be in that car ride. Rosh Hashiva was giving my grandfather for hair. Pretty nerve-wracking to sit with the Gadol Hadar for hair. So Rav Moshe made it that in the car ride he asked him a shayla here, shayla there, and got a feeling of where Mazedi was at. And that was, he said, oh yeah, that was the hair, you passed. It's like, it's easier when it's all over. So he asked Reb Reuven later, what was that number that your father said? He was driving along the FDR, and he just said a number. He said, he gives himself mental tricks to keep his mind sharp. He was looking at the ferry in the Hudson over there, and it was made of these little glass windows, and he counts the windows. And the number he said was like 265, something like that. And I think Rav Moshe glanced at it, and he said the number. So my grandfather went Bein Astarn with a friend, and they tried counting. They made a cheshbon of exactly how many. It was Rav Moshe got it exactly right in a glance. He was able to look up at a building. Someone commented on the infrastructure in Manhattan. He's like, wow, yeah, 65 stories. Like, I can see the number 4. He could see the number 65. His brain was on another level. The delicacy that Rav Moshe dealt with halacha, with people. And Almanan called him up the week after he was nifter, called the Feinstein house and asked, can I speak to the rabbi? And he said, I'm sorry, he passed away. He said, okay. But the person who answered said, can I help you? He said, yeah, no, I called the rabbi to find out what time candlelighting is. He said, you don't have a calendar? So I call the rabbi tells me. He says, lady, it's on every calendar. You just look, see what time the sun goes down. And she said, no, and every Erev Shabbos, for who knows how many years, she had been calling the Gadol Hadar, and Rav Moshe, just with the total ne'imos, would tell her what time Shabbos is. It was in such a way that she thought, of course she asked the Gadol Hadar for candlelighting. You could go on. The stories of Rav Moshe are absolutely endless. We miss him. The world isn't the same without him. The Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael, the Yashiv, the Stapler. When they didn't have an answer, they would make a call to America, and Rav Moshe on the spot would give them an answer. Something they've been cracking their heads over for 10 hours. The Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael would lock hands and dance Moshe Emes V'Seresa Emes. Everyone knew Rav Moshe was just on another level. When Rav Moshe was nifter, so Rav David took the mantle. Rav David really, Zechron Levracha, would embody a lot of Rav Moshe's personality and his tzidkus. At the Levaya, he said that a younger brother should speak because he looks like Rav Moshe, and it'll be ma'orer in people that sadness that they see someone who looks like Rav Moshe talking about his father. Comes to this particular burial spot. This was actually a spot for the Belzer Rebbe. What happened was the Kever Kadisha, historically they've always been strickle like bullies, and they said that a Gadol Hador can't be buried in a regular spot. But David and the Feinsteins are the Pashadiyah, like, no, just find him a spot, just any regular spot. And the Kever Kadisha here were insisting that their Moshe has to be buried in a chashva spot. But David said it doesn't make sense to spend that much money for something that we don't need. There's no reason. My tata wouldn't want that covered. Ma'isa, the Belzer Rebbe heard what was happening. He said chas v'chalila, that there should be even a second pause in the Gadol Hador's burial. And he said, take my spot. The beauty of the world's coming together, and if Moshe was beloved by absolutely everybody. Zchus HaYogan Aleinu.